Hey YouTubers, your buddy Platt, and today I'm going to show you how to make ice cider. So let's go. Okay gang, so in the past we've made cider before. We've made cider, which is a combination of mead and cider. We've made apple pie cider. We've made apple jack, which if you haven't seen that video, I'll throw a link to it up here, which is we take cider, ferment it, and then we end up freezing it and taking out chunks of the ice, and that helps increase the alcohol content. We separate the water through the ice, and now we're left with more alcohol in the liquid that's left over. That was called jacking back in the frontier days, and it's kind of a variation on freeze distillation. What we're going to do here excuse me, is a little different. We're going to freeze before fermentation. I've got a gallon jug of apple cider, and we're going to freeze this and reduce the volume in half to around half a gallon. And what we're going to end up with is less water. We're taking the water out, but we're going to left with more of the flavor and more of the sugar. If you ever had a lot of ciders, the yeast, when it ferments the cider, kind of works through most of that sugar. And a lot of people think ciders are fairly dry. And so if you don't like a dry cider, this might be the solution to that. We're going to have a lot more sugar left over for the yeast to work on, but also for the yeast to kind of leave. They won't be able to get through all the sugar in this. So think of this as kind of the apple cider version of ice wine. If you ever tried ice wine, you know it's a lot sweeter, more intense flavor than a generic Chardonnay, Pinot, whatever white wine. So the first step we're going to do to making our ice cider is fairly simple. I'm going to take this gallon jug of apple cider, throw it in the freezer. We're going to let it freeze overnight, and then we'll come back to thaw out and continue on the process. Okay, gang, so I've let this freeze overnight, and we're going to set this out and thaw it. The plan is we're going to yield about half a gallon. This is a gallon container. So we're going to yield about half a gallon or 2 quarts out of there. When we thaw it out, we're going to leave the rest going to be left just ice or water. And we're going to have a more concentrated solution with more flavor, but also more of the sugars that are natural sugars that are in the apple cider. Then we're going to transfer that into our fermenter, which I've got sanitizing right now. At that time, I'm also going to do what's called a gravity reading with this hydrometer. If you're not a home brewer or never done this before, what a specific gravity reading is basically it's a measurement of the sugars or the density of the solution we're working with. If you're making a beer, or in this case a cider, you do a measurement before you start fermentation, or something called original gravity. And then after fermentation, when you get ready to bottle or what have you, you'll take a second reading. And it's that difference between the two readings that kind of tells you how much alcohol you got in the solution. Also, it's a good way to see if your product's fermented thoroughly through. Most apple ciders, if I'm just doing a regular traditional apple cider, their gravity readings are anywhere between 1.04 and 1.05. We should get quite a bit higher reading because, again, we're concentrating the sugars, the flavors, and everything. So I want to do a reading before we start fermentation. So let me get this thawed out. Let me get everything sanitized and cleaned up, ready to go. And we'll come back and we'll go over our gravity reading and kind of tell you where we go from there. Okay, so I've got about roughly half a gallon out of the frozen cider. I went ahead and pitched my yeast, and we got fermentation started. I did a gravity reading, and our gravity came out somewhere between 1.07 and 1.075. So we definitely have more sugar, a higher gravity than a traditional cider. Unlike a traditional cider, a lot of times people will use like champagne yeast or wine yeast to get that kind of classic dry finish. I've decided to use a ale yeast. I'm using the Saf Ale USO5. Because we're doing the ice thing, we want to retain some of the sugars. I decided not to go with a yeast that wouldn't necessarily ferment out a lot of those sugars, and that's why I went with the ale yeast. But feel free to use whatever you got, or if you're somewhere not near a brew shop, you can still probably use a bread yeast, or if you want some a little drier, again, feel free to go with the wine or champagne yeast. But I'm going with the ale yeast. And I'm going to let this ferment for about a week to 10 days. And then we'll come back and I'll do a gravity reading and see where ABV is. And also kind of see how much sugar is still left over. And unlike a lot of people that want to do a sparkling cider, I'm not going to do a sparkling cider. I'm going to do a still cider, which means I'm not going to bottle condition. I'm not going to add additional sugar in the bottle for the yeast to work with. I'm just going to bottle this still. And what I'll probably end up doing is, after I've decided it's fermented fully, I'll go ahead and cold crash it. I think I've done that on an earlier video. I'll cold crash it, which means I'll put it in the refrigerator, let all the yeast, everything settle, and then I'll siphon off that where it's kind of nice and clear, and we'll bottle and have it ready to go. So let's let this ferment, and we'll come back and do a gravity reading and then wrap up. Okay, guys, it's been a couple of weeks. Our ice cider is fully fermented, and I've came back and done a gravity reading. Our initial gravity reading was 1.072-ish, and I just did the gravity reading. We came out at 1.005. That gives us an ABV around 8.7, 8.8%. Some of the other ciders I've done in the past have been more around 5 or 6, so we bumped up the ABV partially because we just gave it more sugar to work with. At this point, you can go a couple of different directions as far as bottling goes. If you wanted a sparkling cider, you would bottle this and add a little sugar into the bottles to reactivate the yeast. I'm going to do a still cider. I cold crashed this and poured it off the yeast, and make sure before I bottle it that I've got most of the yeast out, and I'm not going to add any additional sugar in the bottles to reactivate the yeast, so I'm just going to have a still cider. I poured a little bit out. I just want to do a little taste test, see what we got. Woo! And it's nice. Definitely pick up a little more of the alcohol. To me, this is a little more substance, a little more wine-like, and again, we got a little higher ABV. I didn't use a wine yeast, but I think compared to a cider, a regular cider, this to me is a little more complex, a little slightly bigger taste. But real nice overall. I like it. Still get a little the sweet punch off the tongue, but it's not super sweet. Overall, I kind of like it. If you wanted to take this up a next level, I guess maybe you could play around and do an iced flavor cider. I think I've done like an apple pie cider before or whatever. And if you wanted to do that, or some people like to do some back sweetening if I wanted to add some more sweetened juice to it, or maybe do, I guess maybe if you wanted to, you could take and refreeze some juice concentrate, but not ferment it, and maybe add it to this, and then you'd have a real sweet but also higher ABV cider. Might be something worth trying in the future. Well, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please subscribe down below. Any questions, comments, or concerns, you can leave them in the comments section, or you can contact me on the Twitter page. Till next time, bottoms up.